In this video, we'll be programming the move up and move down buttons. But before we get started with our code, I'm just going to go across to Microsoft Excel so we can briefly have a look at the technique that we'll be using. Imagine that our list box has found 5 items in the specified folder. So we've got a list of 5 items, we highlight the third item and we click the Move Down button. The technique we'll be using is as follows. We'll first of all copy the text of the item so that we can use it again later, and then we'll simply delete the item. We'll also record, by the way, the position of the original item. Since the user has clicked the Move Down button, we'll then create the new item at its original position +1. And of course, if they had clicked the Up button, we'd recreate the item at its original position -1. So its original position was 3, hence we create it at position 4, so we insert it here. So our 3 now goes in at position 4. Let's just undo those last 2 steps. So if they click the Up button, 3 was its original position, we've deleted it from there. 2 is its new position, so we would insert it here. And our 3 would end up there. And then the final thing we'll do to create the illusion that this item is moving up or down within the list is we'll highlight the item at its new position. So it should look fairly smooth. It should just look to the user as though when they click on an item, it just moves to the appropriate position, up or down. Now of course we're not going to write 2 separate sub-procedures because they're so similar. We'll write one common sub-procedure and then that can be called by each of the 2 buttons. So I'm just going to double click on the form itself and then I'm going to put the sub-procedure right at the top here. And let's simply call it Move Item. So it's going to be private sub Move Item. And because it's going to be called by 2 different buttons, we need to specify a parameter which will control the direction that the item appears to move in. So I'm going to call that int offset as integer. And basically when we call this sub-procedure, we'll pass 1 if they've clicked the Move Down button and -1 if they've clicked the Move Up button. So we need to record 2 things before we delete the item: the position of the item and the text within the item. So we need an integer and a string variable to hold those 2 pieces of information. So dim int index as integer and str index as string. So the steps that we want to perform are, first of all, we want to capture the position of the item to be moved. And I'm just going to copy this, Control C, Control V, Control V. And then we also want to capture the text of the item to be moved. Next, we delete the item. We create new item at appropriate position, above or below the original item. And then, as I said, just to make it nice and smooth, we'll make sure that we select the new item. So to capture the position of the item, we've got our variable int index. So we let int index equal me.lstdocs.listindex. So the list index property tells us which item in the list is currently selected. And the fact that the list index has a starting value of 0 won't make any difference because we're not doing anything such as looping. And then we want the value, so that's going to be captured in str index, and it's simply me.lstdocs.value. To delete an item within the list box, you use remove item. So me.lstdocs.removeItem, and you specify the position of the item to be removed. And of course its position has been captured inside int index. The reverse of removing an item is adding an item, so to create a new item we use me.lstdocs.addItem, and this time we need to specify two things. One is the text that we want to appear in the new item, which of course is the text that we captured inside str index, and the second is the position at which we want the item to be created, which is the original position, int index, plus int offset. And as we've said, int offset will either contain a 1 or a -1, and of course plus -1 is exactly the same as simply -1. And then finally, to make the interface nice and smooth, we'll select that new item, so me.lstdocs.listindex, which will determine which item is highlighted, will also equal int index plus int offset. So there's our common sub-procedure, which will be shared, or called I should say, by both the move up and move down buttons. So we can now go back to the form, highlight move up and double click it. This generates the appropriate event handling sub-procedure. As you can see, click is the default event and click is exactly the one we need. So we just put a single line to call lstdocs. Actually, it hasn't put it above. I just kind of assumed it would be above the one I was just doing, but it's not, so I've just got to cut this. The position within the module, of course, makes absolutely no difference. This is just a case of convenience. So I'm going to paste it in here, and then just put a single line to call move item. So we can just control drag, and of course this is the move up button, so our parameter is -1. Then we can simply highlight this and copy it, Control C, Control V, Control V, change the name of the handler, so it's now CMD down, and of course change the parameter that's being passed to +1. That's it. So we can now test it by going back to our original macro. Here's our message. Let's select the text folder, and let's work on item 3, but I'm just going to delete the duplicated items, so we end up with just 5. So here's item 3. We can move down and we can move up. You'll notice, of course, that we haven't had to cater for the possibility of attempting to move something up when it's already at the lowest index, because we've already taken care of this by simply disabling the move up button on that occasion, and then when we're on the highest index, the move down button has already been disabled previously, so our current code, didn't have to cater for that. So we're almost there. We just need to program the cancel button, which will be very easy, and then the create document button, which will be more challenging, will be our final task.